The laughter started before Jonas Whitfield even reached the front desk. It rolled across the polished training floor of Castellan Group's executive security wing, sharp and confident, the kind of laugh that wanted witnesses. 18 men stood inside the assessment room, men built like they'd been poured into their black compression shirts, former Rangers, cage fighters, men who carried their muscle the way other people carried business cards. Jonas looked like he'd wandered in from a different building entirely. His jacket was 3 years out of style, the elbow worn pale, and the folder under his arm had a bent corner where his daughter had pressed a sticker shaped like a sun that morning, half peeling off already. He heard the laughter and kept walking anyway, shoulders loose, eyes sweeping the room once in a pass, so quiet nobody noticed him doing it. Exits. Mirrors. The blind spot where the ceiling camera's sweep lagged half a second too long, the guard by the east door favoring his left ankle. By the time Jonas reached the registration desk, he already knew more about that room than most of the men who'd trained in it for years. Name? The receptionist asked. Jonas Whitfield, former employer? Independent contract work. That was all it took. A broad-shouldered man near the sparring mats turned, cracking his knuckles loud enough to draw eyes. Derek Sandoval, undefeated in 2 regional combat circuits, the kind of name that got whispered with respect in this building. He looked Jonas over, lip-curling. Independent contract work, Derek repeated like the words tasted bad. That mean you fix people's gutters? A ripple of laughter went through the room. Someone in the back muttered something about the AC unit. Up on the glass-walled observation deck above the floor, a few junior executives traded amused glances, the kind people give each other when they think no one below can see them doing it. But one person up there wasn't laughing. Renata Castellan, CEO of Castellan Group, stood with her arms folded, watching the man in the worn jacket with an expression nobody could quite read. She had approved this final tryout slot herself 2 days after an envelope arrived at her office with no return address and a single line written inside. If he comes, watch his hands, not his paperwork. Derek stepped closer, deliberately crowding Jonas's space chest out. You sure you're not lost, old man? Jonas lifted his eyes for the first time and met him with a stillness that felt almost rude in how calm it was. Deppens, he said quietly. Is this the room where people confuse size for skill? The laughter cut off just enough for the silence to be noticed. Derek's grin sharpened into something meaner. Good, he said, backing toward the sparring circle. First elimination starts now. He came in fast, a freight train shoulder aimed straight at center mass. Jonas didn't step back. He stepped forward, one hand catching the wrist, the other rotating beneath the elbow, hips turning, balance breaking before Derek even understood what was happening to him. Derek's body left the ground and hit the mat flat, the sound echoing through the room like something had been dropped from a height. Dead silence. And in that silence, every alarm in the building went off at once. Red emergency lighting flooded the floor. A voice screamed somewhere above the executive level. Then a security channel crackled through the room's speakers. Armed breach, executive floor. Jonas didn't look at Derek again. He looked straight up toward the observation glass, toward where Renata Castellan had been standing, and she was already gone. He moved before anyone gave him permission to. He crossed the mat, stepped over Derek's stunned body, and reached the stairwell door just as 2 guards collided trying to unlock it at the same time. A hand caught his chest. Stand down, applicant. Jonas caught the man's wrist, gentle but absolute, just enough pressure for the guard to feel how easily it could become something else. Your camera sweep on this floor blinks every 6 seconds, he said, flat, unhurried, like he was reading off a weather report. If somebody timed this, they're already past your line. The guard hesitated, not from the threat, but from the strange calm in Jonas's voice, and that half second was enough. Jonas slid past him, hit the release, and took the stairs 3 at a time. On the 8th floor, he found the wrong kind of quiet, not gunfire. Silence where alarms should have been answered by running feet and weren't. He found a guard slumped near the landing, radio gone, a fading injection mark at his neck. Fast-acting sedative. Clean work, not an amateur's tool. By the 11th floor, something old had crept back into his chest, a rhythm he'd spent 6 years trying to bury under school lunches and overdue rent and bedtime stories about dragons. He hated how easily his body remembered it. The executive corridor was chaos held under unnatural restraint, a receptionist crouched behind her desk crying without sound, 2 assistants frozen by the elevators because no one had told them whether moving made things worse or better. One ceiling camera had been turned to face the wall, deliberately. Where's Renata Castellan? Jonas asked the receptionist. She looked up, recognizing him only as the man from downstairs, and pointed a shaking hand toward the east corridor. 2 men. Said it was evacuation. He was already moving before she finished the sentence. At the corner, he heard voices, one male, flat and controlled, one female, furious and cold. "Take your hand off that door," Renata was saying. "You don't work for me." Jonas used the reflection in a glass trophy case to check the angle before exposing himself. Two men in security uniforms stood near the boardroom entrance. Wrong stance. Too much weight forward. Trained, but rushed. He crossed the distance without a sound, grabbed the nearer man by collar and wrist, and drove him into the wall hard enough to empty his lungs before the second man's hand finished closing around his weapon. Renata dropped instantly, good instincts, while Jonas drove an elbow into the second man's throat, stripped the weapon, and pinned him face first against the glass. Both men were down within seconds. Renata rose slowly, hair loosened from its careful part, eyes sharp with calculation instead of gratitude. "Who exactly are you?" "Right now," Jonas said, checking the corridor. "I'm the only person in this building who noticed your evacuation team wore the wrong shoes." She looked down. Castellan security wore matte rubber soles. These men wore polished dress boots. A tiny detail, a fatal one. "You were downstairs," she said, "at the tryout. You're not even hired." Before she could say more, one of the unconscious men's hands twitched toward his collar. Jonas ripped a tiny communicator free before the man could trigger it, a red light blinking on its surface. "That's not black market gear," Renata said, staring at it. "No," Jonas said. "Somebody funded this properly." Footsteps thundered behind them, Derek and two real guards, finally arriving, breathing hard, eager to reclaim some authority. Derek stopped cold at the sight of two men down and Jonas holding the weapon. "Put that down," he snapped, as if reasserting pride mattered more than the moment. Jonas handed it grip first to the nearest guard without even looking at Derek. "Check the chamber." "Ceramic rounds." The guard did, and his face changed. "Seal this floor," Renata ordered. "No one in without my say." Then, to Jonas, "Come with me." When Derek opened his mouth, she cut him off without turning around. "Not you." She led him into a glass-walled briefing room overlooking the city, the skyline indifferent and calm, while the room itself thrummed with tension. "Start talking," she said. "Who trained you?" "A long time ago. That usually means military. Usually. And today. Today means my daughter's school called twice because I missed pickup while your building screamed alarms through half the district." Something shifted behind Renata's eyes. Not softness, recalibration. "You have a daughter, 8 years old, and you still ran straight at armed men. Running rarely helps with armed men." Before she could press further, a woman entered fast, tablet in hand, tension written across her face. Priya Nakamura, head of internal security, stopped short at the sight of Jonas standing beside the CCO like he belonged there. "Ma'am, our logs were wiped for 90 seconds, right before the breach. Internal credentials were used. Internal meaning? Level 4 clearance or higher." The silence in the room changed texture. Less panic now, more poison. Renata's inner circle held fewer than 10 people with that clearance. "Who is he?" Priya asked. "The reason I'm not downstairs in an ambulance," Renata said. "We haven't cleared him." "You shouldn't," Jonas said, almost amused. "Check my name. You'll find almost nothing." "That's not reassuring. It's honest." Priya's tablet pinged. She frowned at it. His application was submitted anonymously this morning. No digital trace before 9:14. Jonas felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I filed that myself yesterday. In person. Then someone replaced it." He thought of the envelope that had shown up at his apartment 2 nights earlier. No sender, no explanation, just an address and a time. His daughter had asked if maybe it was one of those strange lucky things adults always manage to miss. He'd almost thrown it away. His phone buzzed. The school, a third time. His jaw tightened in a way Renata noticed. "Answer it," she said. A voice came through, strained but polite. "Mr. Whitfield, Maya says not to worry, but her pickup authorization expired 20 minutes ago. I'm delayed." "I'll fix it," Jonas said, eyes closing for 1 second. Then his daughter's voice, faint and bright behind the teacher's. "Dad, did you get the job?" He looked through the glass at the unconscious men, at the armed guards moving through red light, at a billionaire studying him like he was a file that had started breathing. "Not yet," he said quietly. "Still trying." "You will," she answered, with the total confidence only children carry. The call ended. Renata folded her arms. "Mr. Whitfield, until I know who placed your file and who placed armed men in my hallway, nobody leaves this floor, including you." He nodded once. "Then lock your boardroom too. Why?" "Because whoever failed to grab you might still be sitting at your next meeting." Outside in the corridor, Derek watched through the glass, humiliation curdling into something darker as he understood Jonas had just become impossible to ignore. And in an office no one was watching, a man quietly deleted a second set of access logs before security could trace the terminal. The real attack hadn't started yet. The boardroom on the top floor had been built to intimidate before anyone said a word. 40 feet of dark glass, a table cut from a single slab of walnut, acoustic panels that swallowed whispers whole. Tonight it felt less like power and more like a trap dressed up as architecture. Renata stood at the head of the table while her senior staff gathered in uneven silence. Calvin Ashford arrived last, immaculate as always, tie perfectly centered, breathing just hard enough to look concerned without looking afraid. Priya stayed near the wall, tracking the partially restored security feed. Jonas stood by the door, uninvited into the circle but impossible to overlook. Derek had talked his way back in under the excuse of assisting security, the bruise along his jaw more visible than he probably realized. "Someone used executive-level access to put armed imposters on my floor," Renata said. "Before we go any further, I want to know why our camera loops failed exactly 3 minutes before the tryout downstairs." Calvin frowned with practiced disbelief. "You think someone in this room coordinated that?" "I think facts don't care what I think," she said. "And the facts point inward." Derek crossed his arms. "With respect, maybe we focus on why an unverified applicant is in your boardroom giving tactile opinions like he owns the place." Jonas didn't flinch. "If I'd staged it, you'd still be on that mat wondering what happened." "Enough," Renata said before Derek could push further. She turned to Jonas. "Earlier you said the attackers wore the wrong shoes before anyone else noticed. How?" "Trained private teams standardized their tread. Those men wore polished dress boots. Someone wanted them to read as corporate security from a distance, not survive close inspection." Calvin's expression flickered, half a degree, small enough that most people would have missed it. Jonas didn't. "And that means what?" Calvin asked. "It means whoever hired them expected confusion, not contact, a fast extraction, 90 seconds, maybe less." Priya checked her tablet. "That matches our deleted feed window exactly. Interesting analysis," Calvin said, from an independent contractor. "Former protective intelligence," Jonas said. The air in the room shifted. Renata caught it first. Protective intelligence for whom? He didn't answer right away. He rarely talked about that stretch of his life because names led to memories, and memories led to the nights his daughter sometimes found him still sitting at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., staring at nothing. "Mostly people who couldn't afford to be wrong," he finally said. "Witnesses, diplomats." Priya was already typing. "Nothing comes up under your current name." "Current name?" Renata asked. Jonas's jaw tightened. He'd said more than he meant to. Before he could explain, Priya's screen lit up again. "Ma'am, badge movement on the records floor. Someone's using deputy-level credentials to access the archive servers." Renata's eyes went straight to Calvin, the only deputy with that clearance left in the room. Calvin spread his hands. "I've been standing here." Jonas was already moving. "Archive access after a breach means cleanup." Renata followed without hesitation. "Priya with me. Derek, stay." Derek bristled. "You're sending him again?" "Because he keeps arriving before the danger does," Renata said, already walking. They took the service stairs, Jonas leading, Priya pulling floor maps as she moved, Renata behind in heels until Jonas stopped, crouched, and pulled a pair of rubber-soled overshoes from a janitorial closet, handing them to her without a word. "Queter," he said. She put them on without arguing, and for half a second the absurdity of the moment cracked something loose in Priya's expression. On the records floor, the lights flickered. One server room door stood ajar. Jonas raised a hand, stopping both women at the threshold, and pointed at a hairline wire stretched at ankle height across the doorway. "Trip alarm," Priya whispered. "Trigger," Jonas said, and lifted it free using a badge he'd taken off one of the attackers upstairs. Inside, a terminal glowed with half-deleted access logs. A shadow shifted behind a server rack. Jonas crossed the room before anyone could react. A crash, a figure bolting for the rear exit, Priya shouting, Renata catching only fragments of motion. The time real guards arrived, the intruder was gone, but a torn strip of ID badge remained in Jonas's hand. Renata took it, her eyes hardening. "Finance Division. That prefix is Executive Audit Access," Priya said. "Calvin's division handles audit every quarter." Nobody said his name. Everyone thought it. Jonas turned to the terminal, scanning the deletion trail. They weren't covering the breach footage first, they were digging for old personnel files. "Whose?" Priya asked. He tapped the screen. His own name appeared, an older version of it, an older clearance tier filed under a federal contractor program 9 years gone. Renata read it aloud before he could close the window. "Jonas Caro Whitfield, Federal Protective Liaison, Restricted Deployment. Middle name, used on classified work. You worked federal protection corridors," Renata said. "Until I stopped." "Why?" His phone buzzed again before he could answer. The school. His daughter's voice came through first this time, bright with the particular cheerfulness kids use when they sense something but won't ask directly. "Dad, Miss Park says if you're still busy, I can stay for art club. Did you eat something? Half a sandwich." The other half looked sad. Despite everything, his mouth almost smiled. Sad sandwiches still count. Maya lowered her voice like she was sharing a secret. Did you win? He looked at Renata, at Priya, at the broken server logs and the torn badge in his hand. Not finished yet. You sound like your serious voice, Maya said. That means somebody lied near you. Renata's eyes sharpened at that. Children didn't say things like that unless they'd learned to hear truth from silence the hard way. I'll come soon, Jonas said. Promise. He hated making that word a promise. He said it anyway. After the call ended, the room felt smaller. Renata studied him differently now, not as an asset but as a contradiction. A man with federal clearance and worn boots and a daughter who could read danger through a phone line. Someone searched your old file today before the breach, Priya said. Then whoever invited me knew exactly who I used to be. You think the anonymous note was bait? Either bait, Jonas said, or a warning. Before anyone could decide which, the building lights died. Full blackout. Emergency red came back half a second later, weaker, pulsing like a heartbeat losing rhythm. Backup grid shouldn't fail like that, Priya said. Jonas already knew what it meant. Stage 2. Then the fire alarm triggered, not the breach signal, but full evacuation. A synthetic voice echoing through every floor. Proceed to nearest exit. I didn't authorize that, Renata said sharply. Exactly why you don't move, Jonas said. Footsteps thundered somewhere above them, glass shattering on another floor. Derek's voice shouting Renata's name from too far away to trust the direction. Jonas listened at the door, body angled still. Someone wants you moving, he said, and in this building, moving is where they can predict you. Then tell me where they can't. He looked toward a maintenance shaft hidden behind the cooling ducts. Places executives never notice. A single gunshot cracked somewhere above them. Renata looked at Jonas. For the first time all night, she handed him authority without saying a word. The maintenance shaft smelled like dust and old wiring, the kind of forgotten infrastructure that polished towers like to pretend didn't exist. Jonas climbed first, guiding Renata up through the narrow frame while Priya followed below, still clutching a dead tablet out of habit. Outside the shaft, the tower trembled with engineered panic. Alarms, locked elevators, announcements designed to herd rather than protect. Jonas stopped halfway between floors, listening to footsteps overhead, too coordinated to be fleeing staff. They're pushing movement toward the south exits. Why south? Renata asked. Because your boardroom has a clean sightline from the south terrace. Sniper angle, Priya breathed. If evacuation sends your people there, one shot finishes it and panic covers the rest. Renata's jaw hardened, but no fear showed in her face. Only something colder. Calvin scheduled tonight's investor review in the boardroom. Said the south route was best for controlled extraction. Then he either knows the pattern, Jonas said, or he wrote it. They came up through a service grate near the records corridor, the floor seemingly empty. But Jonas had learned a long time ago that empty rooms during danger were never actually empty. He crouched, studying the reflections off the polished floor trim rather than exposing his head directly. Two men in stripped tactical jackets moved near the boardroom entrance, one watching the corridor, the other placing something beneath the conference table. That's my boardroom, Renata whispered. And that's not a bomb, Jonas said. Directional suppressor, loud enough to read as crossfire, precise enough to kill one person and wound the rest. Who sits at the head of that table? I do, she said. He studied the guard's rhythm, weight shifting onto his left leg every 4 seconds, an old knee injury, predictable. He handed Priya a steel wrench from the maintenance panel. When I move, lock the door behind me. That's not standard procedure. Neither is surviving tonight. Renata caught his sleeve. If Calvin's involved, he won't be alone. People who arrange things like this never stand near the weapon, Jonas said. They stand near the explanation afterward. Then he moved, fast enough that the first guard registered only motion before Jonas's forearm hit his throat and drove him into the wall. The second man spun inside the boardroom, weapon half raised, but Priya slammed the door inward exactly as Jonas crossed it, throwing off the angle. 2 shots tore into the ceiling instead of flesh. Jonas crossed the table, struck the man's wrist, stripped the gun, and drove him over the walnut edge hard enough to splinter it. Renata entered a second later and froze. Calvin Ashford stood on the far side of the room with 3 executives behind him, all performing surprise a half-second too slowly. What is happening? Calvin demanded. But Jonas had already seen what he was trying to hide. A small black switch in his right hand, a thumb resting on it, ready. Jonas lunged exactly as Calvin pressed it. The device didn't explode outward. It fired a compressed ballistic burst toward the chair Renata should have been standing behind. Because Jonas hit Calvin's arm mid-trigger, the burst tore through the glass wall instead, spraying the skyline into shards. Renata ducked as fragments rained down. One executive screamed. Calvin staggered back, losing the trigger but not his composure. "You insane fool, security!" he shouted, pointing at Jonas. "He triggered it! It might have worked if Renata hadn't seen the blood already darkening Jonas's palm where shattered glass had torn it open. Your thumb was on the switch," she said. Calvin straightened his tie with terrifying calm. "And now we're taking accusations from a man with erased federal files. The badge from the archive belongs to your division," Prius said, wrench still in hand, breathing hard. Calvin didn't blink. "Finance touches half this building." "Then explain," Renata said. "Why the procurement code on that suppressor traces to a vendor approved only through executive operations." Something changed in Calvin's eyes. Not panic, but the dead calm of a man whose script had failed and was already writing the next one. He smiled faintly. "Because someone in this company is tired of watching you protect sentiment over survival. You put armed men in my hallway over quarterly pressure?" "No," Calvin said. "I tried to remove hesitation before investors found out how much of this company only still exists because I've been delaying the collapse for 18 months. The confession didn't land dramatically. It landed tired, which somehow made it worse. Jonas saw it before anyone else did. Calvin was talking too long. He expected interruption. He turned toward the shattered window just as a silhouette shifted on the rooftop across the gap. "Down," he shouted, already moving. The first round shattered the wall behind where Renata's head had been a half-second earlier. Jonas pulled Priya down by the shoulder as the second round hit lower, glass exploding again. Calvin ran, not toward safety, toward the side door, clearly expecting an exit to be waiting. Jonas had one impossible second to choose between chasing him and shielding Renata from the next shot. He chose Renata. The third round caught the chair behind her instead of her spine because Jonas's own shoulder took the spray of fragments meant for that angle. Payne went white and electric, but he stayed upright. Priya grabbed the fallen weapon, crawled to the wall panel, and slammed the emergency shutters down over the broken glass. Darkness dropped across the skyline with brutal finality. Inside, everyone breathed like people who hadn't yet decided to trust their own survival. Calvin was gone. The side door still swung open behind him. "You're hit," Renata said, looking at Jonas's shoulder and hand. "Not deep," he lied automatically. Priya checked the corridor and came back furious. He cleared the south elevator manually. He had an exit ready. "Lock every floor," Renata ordered. "Nobody leaves this tower." Jonas pressed his bleeding palm against the table edge to stay upright. Renata noticed the older scar beneath his sleeve, pale and thin, where another bullet had once passed through nearly the same place. "How many times have you done this?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer. His phone buzzed instead. He answered, because after gunfire, a child's voice was the only sound that still felt clean. "Dad, are you driving home yet?" He closed his eyes. "Soon. You promised pizza if the interview went well." Blood slipped between his fingers onto the walnut table. "Then pizza still stands." Maya's voice dropped lower. "You sound hurt." He opened his eyes and looked at Renata, like the answer belonged to more than one person now. "Just tired. Mom used to say tired voices happen when brave people don't sit down soon enough." The call ended, but the words stayed in the room a long time after. Renata looked at the blood on the table, at the shattered glass, at the chair where she should have died, and at the man who'd walked in that morning carrying a folder with a sticker shaped like a sun on it. She turned to the executive still crouched against the wall. "Emergency session begins now," she said, her voice colder than any alarm the building had sounded. "Anyone still loyal to Calvin Ashford should leave before security finds them first." Below them in the parking structure, Calvin moved fast between Blacktown cars, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. "Open the south gate, no delays." The gate didn't move. Instead, the overhead lights snapped on row by row, and Jonas stood near a concrete column ahead of him, one hand pressed to his ruined shoulder, the other hanging loose like pain was something he'd postponed rather than survived. Calvin's polish slipped for the first time all night. "You should be upstairs bleeding for sympathy. You should have left before trying to explain greed like it was philosophy. You think she wins because she survives one night? Investors will tear her apart by morning." "Maybe," Jonas said, stepping closer. "But murder usually hurts quarterly numbers worse." Calvin reached inside his coat. But before the motion finished, Renata's voice cut through the structure from behind him. "Don't." She emerged with Priya and two officers at her side, pale but unshaken. Calvin froze, then slowly drew out, not a weapon, but a thin envelope, almost smiling as he tossed it toward her. "Before you arrest me," he said, "you should know who invited him here." Inside was the handwritten note that had shown up at Jonas's apartment. On the back, a single name, Elena Whitfield. Jonas stared at it before Renata even spoke. Elena, his late wife. "Impossible," he said. Priya found a printout tucked beneath the note, an archived email recovered from a legal hold years old. Elena had once worked temporary compliance review for a federal subcontract auditing Castellan group, and 3 weeks before the highway crash that killed her, she'd flagged a string of shell transfers under a sealed code nobody had ever reopened. She found too much, Calvin said, bitterness replacing his composure. And then, conveniently, the wrong car got hit. Tragic timing became useful paperwork. Jonas didn't move for several seconds because grief after years doesn't explode. It arrives like weight, settling back into a space you'd taught yourself to walk around. Calvin lunged for the side lane in that pause, but the officers brought him down before he reached the next pillar. The sound of handcuffs closing ended the night more completely than any alarm had. Hours later, after statements were taken and the ambulances had gone, Jonas sat in the quiet lobby while a medic wrapped his shoulder. Renata stood near the entrance, watching dawn start to pale the city outside. "You saved my company," she said. "No," Jonas said, shaking his head slightly. "I just stopped one man from finishing what he started." "What starts now?" Before he could answer, the lobby doors opened, and Maya ran in still wearing her school sweater, art folder under one arm, because Priya had gone to bring her once the tower was cleared. She crossed the marble floor without slowing and stopped only when she saw the bandage. "You said tired," she accused softly. Jonas smiled for the first real time that night and knelt despite the pain in his shoulder. "Turns out brave people should sit down sooner." Maya hugged him carefully, then looked up at Renata with the particular seriousness only children manage. "Did he get the job?" Renata crouched to her height, her eyes softer than they'd been all night. "Only if he agrees." Maya studied her father for a long moment, then nodded like she was approving terms the adults had taken far too long to settle. Outside, the first sunlight touched the glass front of Castellan Group, and for the first time since walking into that building, Jonas felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Not the old instinct for danger, but the quieter possibility that protecting one future didn't have to mean running from the past forever.